My husband left me in the rain 37 miles from home. He said I needed a lesson or didn't argue. I just watched him drive away. A black truck pulled up moments later. My bodyguard stepped out, calm and ready. I smiled as I climbed in. His cruelty had ended. This was his last mistake. I pressed record on my phone and slipped it back into my pocket as Andrew's Mercedes pulled into the empty rest stop. The rain hadn't started yet, but I could smell it coming. "Get out," he said, not even turning off the engine. "You need a lesson, Leslie. Walking home might teach you some respect." 37 miles. He'd calculated it perfectly. Too far for an Uber, too remote for public transport. What he didn't know was that I'd been recording everything for 8 months, and Marcus was already parked behind the abandoned gas station, waiting for my signal. The leather seat creaked as I turned to face him. Andrew's jaw was set in that familiar line of satisfaction, the one he wore when closing a particularly ruthless deal at his hedge fund. 3 hours ago, we'd been sitting in Morton's steakhouse celebrating our anniversary. Now, he was abandoning me on a remote stretch of highway, because I'd asked why $10,000 had disappeared from our joint account. "You're seriously doing this?" I kept my voice steady, letting the phone capture every word. "Actions have consequences, Leslie. You went behind my back, called my accountant, embarrassed me with your paranoid questions. Maybe a long walk in the rain will remind you who manages the money in this family." I thought about the pearl earring in my jewelry box at home. Nain's earring, found under our bed 2 days ago. The $10,000 had probably bought her something pretty, but I didn't mention it. Not yet. Everything had to happen in the right order, just as Marcus and I had rehearsed. "It's going to storm," I said, gesturing at the darkening sky. "Then you'd better start walking." His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. "Unless you want to apologize right now and admit you were wrong. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here with me today. If you believe that no one deserves to be abandoned in a storm, literal or metaphorical, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps these important stories reach those who need them most." 6 months ago, I would have apologized. 6 months ago, I still believed the marriage could be saved. That was before I'd found the second set of books for his company, before the mysterious withdrawals, before discovering he'd been slowly transferring our assets into accounts only he controlled. The moment I'd started asking questions, he turned vicious. Tonight was his escalation, but it was also his mistake. "I'll walk," I said, opening the door. "Smart choice. Maybe by the time you get home, you'll remember your place." I stepped out onto the cracked asphalt. The rest stop had been abandoned for years, just a dark building with boarded windows and a parking lot being reclaimed by weeds. Andrew had chosen it specifically for its isolation. He'd mentioned it last week casually while we were driving past. "Imagine being stranded here," he'd said, "miles from anywhere." That's when I knew what he was planning. The Mercedes engine revved. Through the passenger window, I could see him checking his phone, probably texting Nain that the deed was done. Then he pulled away, tires squealing slightly on the worn pavement, leaving me standing alone in the gathering darkness. I counted to 60, watching his tail lights disappear around the bend. Then I walked calmly toward the abandoned gas station where Marcus's black Ford was hidden. My brother stepped out, holding an umbrella and a thermos of coffee. "Did you get everything?" he asked. "Every word." I pulled out my phone, stopping the recording. He actually said, "I need to remember my place." Marcus shook his head. 3 years of watching him control you was bad enough, but this, he gestured at the empty rest stop. "This is criminal abandonment. Rebecca's going to have a field day with this recording." I accepted the coffee gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through my hands. The rain was starting now, fat drops hitting the cracked concrete. By morning, Andrew would think I'd spent the night walking through a storm, broken and humiliated. He'd expect to find me huddled on our doorstep, ready to beg forgiveness. "Valentina's ready?" I asked. "She's been monitoring the accounts all evening. The moment he transferred that $10,000 this afternoon, she documented everything. The forensic audit goes back 2 years. He's been bleeding money into offshore accounts, probably planning to divorce you once he'd hidden enough. And Rebecca's filing the emergency papers at 9 tomorrow morning." We climbed into Marcus's truck just as the sky opened up, rain hammering against the windshield. I thought about Andrew driving home, satisfied with his cruel lesson, maybe pouring himself a scotch to celebrate putting his wife in her place. He had no idea that 8 months ago, when he'd first started hiding money, I'd hired my own team. Marcus had installed cameras throughout our house under the guise of security upgrades. Valentina, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial abuse cases, had been tracking every penny. Rebecca, one of the city's most ruthless divorce attorneys, had been building a case file that now filled 3 boxes. "The house recordings uploaded successfully," Marcus said, checking his phone. "We've got him on camera last Tuesday bringing Nyan there while you were at your mother's. They used your bed." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak. That had passed months ago. This was resolve, hard and crystalline. "He's been planning this for a while," I said. "The escalation, the financial control, the isolation from friends. Classic abuse patterns. Rebecca says judges don't look kindly on husbands who abandon their wives as punishment." Marcus drove carefully through the storm, taking back roads to avoid any possibility of Andrew seeing us. We'd planned this route weeks ago, even doing practice runs. Every detail mattered. The hotel room was booked under my maiden name, paid for with cash Marcus had withdrawn gradually over 2 months. The clothes I'd need were already there, along with copies of all the documentation. "You know he'll come looking for you when you don't show up tonight," Marcus said. "Let him. The hotel security cameras will show me checking in alone, soaking wet, traumatized. The front desk clerk will testify that I could barely speak through the tears." Rebecca coached me on exactly what to say and how to act. The rain grew heavier as we drove toward the city. Andrew would be home by now, probably on his second drink, maybe calling Nyan to brag about teaching me a lesson. Tomorrow morning, he'd wake up expecting to find me broken. Instead, he'd find his assets frozen, his office locked, and federal investigators waiting to discuss the discrepancies Valentina had uncovered in his hedge fund's books. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked as the hotel came into view. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, independent and successful, before Andrew had systematically dismantled my life. I thought about the recording on my phone, his cold voice telling me to get out and walk 37 miles in a storm. I thought about Nyan's earring and the empty bank accounts and the prenup he'd hidden in his office that would have left me with nothing. "I've been ready for 8 months, I said. He just gave me the final piece of evidence I needed." Marcus pulled up to the hotel's side entrance. I grabbed the small bag we'd prepared, just enough to look like I'd escaped with nothing, and stepped out into the rain. It was time to play the part of the traumatized wife, abandoned and afraid. Tomorrow, Andrew would learn who really needed a lesson. The hotel lobby felt impossibly bright after the darkness outside. Water dripped from my hair onto the marble floor as I approached the front desk, my hands shaking just enough to be convincing. The night clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, immediately reached for a stack of towels. "Oh my goodness, are you all right?" She rushed around the counter, wrapping a towel around my shoulders. "My husband," I managed, letting my voice crack. "He left me at a rest stop, in the storm. I had to walk for miles before someone helped me." Her face shifted from concern to horror. Perfect. Every word would be documented in the hotel's incident report, just as Rebecca had instructed. The clerk guided me to a chair and brought me hot tea while processing my check-in. I gave her my maiden name, Leslie Harrison, and paid with the emergency credit card I'd opened 6 months ago. The one Andrew knew nothing about. Room 412 was small but clean, overlooking the city lights blurred by rain. I locked the door, put the chain on, and finally allowed myself to breathe. Then I pulled out my second phone, the one Marcus had given me, and played back the recording from the car. Andrew's voice filled the room, cold and measured. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Calling my accountant behind my back, asking questions about our finances like you'd understand the answers." My own voice, carefully controlled. "It's our money, Andrew. I have a right to know where it's going." "Our money?" His laugh was sharp. "I earn it. I manage it. You spend it on overpriced groceries and those ridiculous charity luncheons. $70 for organic vegetables last week, Leslie. $70. I remembered that shopping trip. I'd bought ingredients for the dinner party he'd insisted on hosting for his clients. The same dinner where he'd spent $800 on wine without blinking. The recording continued. "You embarrassed me at the Morrisons' party, contradicting me about the European markets in front of my colleagues. Where did you even get those opinions? Some morning talk show? I have an MBA from Northwestern." "Andrew, I worked in financial services for 5 years before we met." "Before I rescued you from that mediocre career, you mean? You were analyzing penny stocks at a third-tier firm. I gave you a life you never could have achieved on your own." I closed my eyes, remembering the woman I'd been at Henderson Investments. I hadn't been analyzing penny stocks. I'd been managing a portfolio worth $30 million. But Andrew had rewritten history so many times, sometimes even I forgot the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Valentina found something. 3 more accounts in the Caymans. He's been moving money for 18 months. 18 months. I thought back to when things had started changing. The sudden interest in separate checking accounts for tax purposes, the financial advisor who appeared without explanation, the documents he'd asked me to sign without reading because it's just routine stuff, trust me. Another text, this one from Rebecca. Judge Coleman agreed to emergency hearing tomorrow at 2 p.m. Bring the recording. Judge Patricia Coleman had a reputation for seeing through men like Andrew. She'd presided over 3 high-profile financial abuse cases in the past year, all resulting in favorable outcomes for the wives. Rebecca had specifically waited for her rotation. I changed into the dry clothes from the emergency bag I'd hidden here yesterday, then sat at the small desk and began writing. Not the statement Rebecca would help me polish for court, but notes for myself, reminders of who I really was beneath the person Andrew had tried to create. I wrote about the promotion I'd turned down, because Andrew said the travel would strain our marriage. The investment opportunity I'd identified that would have tripled my personal savings if I'd still had personal savings. The friendship with my college roommate that ended when Andrew convinced me she was jealous of our happiness. My phone rang. Andrew's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker, recording it with my second phone. Leslie, this is ridiculous. It's been 3 hours. The lesson's been learned, okay? Call me back and I'll come get you. Don't make this worse than it needs to be. 10 minutes later, another call. This time, his voice was harder. I know you have your phone. Stop being childish and call me back. If you're trying to worry me, it's not working. I'm going to bed. You can find your own way home. But I could hear the edge creeping in. He was starting to realize something was off. I'd always called by now, always apologized, always come crawling back. The silence was breaking his script. At midnight, Nyan called. I almost didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer, staying silent. Hello, Leslie. Her voice was uncertain. Andrew asked me to call you. He's worried. He said you two had a fight and you're not answering his calls. He wants you to know he's sorry, and you should come home. Andrew never apologized, never admitted fault. That he'd sent his mistress to deliver a fake apology showed how off balance he was. I hung up without speaking. By 1:00 in the morning, the calls were coming every 15 minutes. Andrew, his mother, Margaret, even his business partner, James. I documented every single one, their numbers, their times, their increasingly frantic messages. The abandoned wife was supposed to be desperate for rescue, not maintaining radio silence. I ordered room service, charging it to the card, soup and salad and a glass of wine. Let the receipt show I was composed enough to eat. Let it document that I wasn't falling apart the way Andrew expected. At 2:30, a text came through that made me smile. Not from Andrew, but from our neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Saw Andrew in his driveway with a flashlight looking under your car. Then he drove off fast. Is everything okay? He was looking for my car, not knowing Marcus had moved it to a long-term parking garage across town 2 days ago. Another piece of evidence that I'd been planning to leave, that his abandonment had simply accelerated my timeline. I pulled the curtains aside and watched the storm rage over the city. Somewhere out there, Andrew was beginning to realize his perfectly controlled world was slipping. He thought he'd taught me a lesson about power and place. Tomorrow, when the markets opened and he discovered his offshore accounts frozen, when his keycard failed at the office, when federal investigators appeared with questions about discrepancies Valentina had uncovered, he'd understand who'd really been teaching whom. The rain hammered against the window like it was trying to break through. 8 months of planning, of documenting, of pretending to be the subdued wife while building a case that would destroy him, all leading to this moment, this perfect storm of his own making. I set my alarm for 7, knowing I'd need to look appropriately distraught for the emergency hearing. Rebecca would meet me at noon to prepare, but for now, for these few hours, I sat in the darkness and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Freedom. The morning sun cut through the hotel curtains at 7 sharp, but I'd been awake since 5, sitting at the small desk with my laptop open to our joint checking account. The balance showed exactly what I expected. Andrew had already moved another $20,000 out at 6:47 a.m. He was panicking, trying to hide assets before I could get to them. Too late. Valentina had already documented everything. By noon, my hotel suite had transformed into a command center. Valentina arrived first, wheeling in 2 suitcases full of printed documents, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged from working through the night. She spread everything across the dining table methodically: bank statements, wire transfer records, falsified tax documents, each stack labeled with color-coded tabs. "The Cayman accounts are frozen as of 9 this morning," she said, pulling up a spreadsheet on her laptop. "Andrew tried to access them at dawn. 3 failed attempts. He's probably destroying his office right now." Rebecca walked in next, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid legal terms I only half understood. She ended the call and turned to me with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Judge Coleman moved our hearing to 1:00. She wants to address this immediately." "Also, Andrew hired Richard Blackwood?" Marcus asked, entering with a box of surveillance equipment. "The same one who got that pharmaceutical executive off last year." "Blackwood doesn't come cheap," Rebecca said. "Andrew must have liquidated something significant to afford him." I felt a flutter of concern, but Rebecca placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Blackwood's good, but he can't argue with video evidence and financial records. Plus, he's walking into this cold. We've had 8 months to prepare." Marcus connected his laptop to the television and pulled up the surveillance footage from our home. "I've compiled the highlights, if you can call them that. Fair warning, Leslie, this isn't easy to watch." The first clip showed Andrew in his study at 2 a.m. 3 weeks ago. I'd been asleep upstairs, knocked out by the sleeping pills he'd started suggesting I take for my anxiety. On screen, Andrew carefully photographed documents from our safe, then placed them back exactly as they were. The documents were our joint investment portfolios, my mother's power of attorney forms, and the deed to the lake house my grandmother had left me. "He's been building a duplicate file," Valentina explained, "creating forgeries with subtle changes. If you hadn't caught this, he could have slowly replaced the originals." The next clip was worse. Andrew and Nyan in our living room 2 months ago, when he told me he was at a client dinner. She was wearing my robe, the silk one from our honeymoon in Paris. They were laughing about something on his phone. "Turn the volume up," I said, though my stomach turned. Andrew's voice filled the room. She actually believed me when I said the conference was mandatory. I've trained her well. A few more months and I'll have everything transferred. Then we can stop this charade. Nyan's giggle was like nails on glass. "The prenup really says she gets nothing?" "The prenup's irrelevant. She'll never fight it. Leslie doesn't have the spine. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll be in Costa Rica and she'll be too broken to do anything about it." Marcus paused the video. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I stood up, walked to the window, and stared at the city below. Somewhere out there, Andrew was probably in his office trying to figure out why his computer access was revoked, why his assistant couldn't reach the bank, why everything was falling apart. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "Do you want to see it?" I nodded. The next clip showed Andrew on the phone in our garage, pacing between our cars. The timestamp showed last Tuesday when I'd been at my book club. "Jennifer's been perfect," he was saying. "She has no idea I'm recording our conversations. Every detail about Leslie's mother's estate, the Alzheimer's diagnosis, their hiding, the trust fund from their father. It's worth nearly $2 million, and Leslie doesn't even know it exists." My legs felt weak. Jennifer, my younger sister, who I'd been protecting from her gambling addiction for years, who I'd covered for with our parents countless times. She'd been feeding Andrew information about our family, about money I didn't even know existed. "When did he contact her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Valentina pulled up phone records. "First contact was 13 months ago. Regular calls started 10 months ago, always when you weren't home. He's been paying her debts in exchange for information." Rebecca checked her watch. "We need to leave for court in 30 minutes, Leslie. Seeing him today. Are you ready for this?" I turned from the window. "Show me the rest first. I need to know everything." Marcus clicked to another folder. "These are from his office computer. I had a contact in IT pull them before Andrew's access was cut this morning." The screen filled with emails between Andrew and his attorney, dated 6 months ago. The subject line read, "Project Fresh Start." Inside were detailed plans for divorcing me, including psychological tactics to make me doubt myself, financial moves to leave me destitute, and even suggestions for gradually increasing emotional abuse to make me more compliant during proceedings. One line stood out. The key is to make her believe she's going crazy, gaslight consistently, hide things, deny conversations, contradict her memories. By the time we file, she'll be too unstable to fight effectively. I thought about all the times over the past year when Andrew had told me I was misremembering things, the dinner reservation I'd made that he swore I'd never told him about, the conversation about visiting my parents that he claimed never happened, the jewelry that went missing then reappeared in strange places. I'd started writing things down secretly, thinking I was losing my mind. It was following a playbook, Rebecca said. This attorney, Douglas Stern, specializes in high-net-worth divorces where one spouse wants to leave the other with nothing. He's currently under investigation by the bar for ethics violations. Valentina pulled up one final document. This is what triggered our emergency filing this morning. Andrew transferred $3.2 million from his hedge fund's client accounts into a personal account in Panama yesterday afternoon, right before he abandoned you. He must have thought he'd have more time before anyone noticed. He was running, I said, understanding flooding through me. The abandonment wasn't just about control. He knew something was closing in. The SEC received an anonymous tip yesterday morning, Rebecca said with a slight smile, about irregularities in his fund's reporting. I looked at her. You? Valentina, actually. Once she documented the embezzlement, we had an obligation to report it. The weight of Andrew's crimes was staggering. This wasn't just about our marriage or his affair. He was a criminal who'd been using me as cover while he pillaged client accounts and prepared his escape. The man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years was capable of destroying not just me, but dozens of innocent investors who trusted him with their retirement savings. Judge Coleman needs to see all of this, I said, gathering my strength. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. Rebecca smiled, the kind of smile that reminded me why she'd never lost a financial abuse case. She'll see it all, and then Andrew Mitchell is going to learn what it feels like to lose everything. The courthouse corridors were marble and mahogany, designed to intimidate. I walked through them in my sharpest suit, the navy one Andrew had never seen because I bought it last month specifically for this moment. Rebecca walked beside me, briefcase in hand, while Marcus flanked my other side. We entered courtroom 4B at exactly 12:05 p.m. Andrew was already there, seated beside Richard Blackwood, whose $1,000 haircut couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes. Andrew looked smaller somehow, his usual commanding presence diminished by wrinkled clothes and shadows under his eyes. He'd clearly slept in his office. When he saw me, his expression shifted from exhaustion to pure rage. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Patricia Coleman entered, her black robes adding gravity to an already tense atmosphere. She took her seat and immediately began reviewing the documents before her, reading glasses perched on her nose. "We're here for an emergency petition filed by Leslie Mitchell regarding marital assets and spousal abandonment," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen every type of marital disaster. "Mr. Blackwood, I see you've just been retained this morning." "Yes, Your Honor. We request a continuance to properly review." "Denied. Your client allegedly abandoned his wife in dangerous conditions last night. Time is of the essence." She turned to Rebecca. "Counselor, present your evidence." Rebecca stood, smooth as silk. "Your Honor, at approximately 8:47 p.m. yesterday, Andrew Mitchell deliberately abandoned his wife at a rest stop 37 miles from their home during a severe storm. We have audio recording of the incident." She played the recording through the courtroom speakers. Andrew's voice filled the space, cold and clear. "You need a lesson, Leslie. Walking home might teach you some respect." I watched Andrew's face go white. Blackwood leaned over, whispering furiously. Andrew shook his head, gesturing wildly with his hands. "Furthermore," Rebecca continued, "Mr. Mitchell has been systematically hiding marital assets for 18 months. We have documentation of offshore accounts totaling $8 million and evidence of embezzlement from his hedge fund totaling $3.2 million. "Objection," Blackwood stood. "These are unsubstantiated allegations." "Then let's substantiate them," Rebecca said calmly, producing a stack of bank documents. "Exhibit A through F, Your Honor. Wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, all initiated by Mr. Mitchell without his wife's knowledge or consent." Judge Coleman reviewed the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. Mr. Mitchell, did you abandon your wife last night? Andrew stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, there was a misunderstanding. My wife and I had an argument. It's a yes or no question, Mr. Mitchell. I left her at a rest stop, but during a storm, 37 miles from home. She had her phone. She could have called someone. The judge's eyebrows rose. How considerate of you. She turned back to Rebecca. Continue. Rebecca pulled up financial records on the courtroom screen. Mr. Mitchell has also been conducting an extramarital affair with his assistant, Nayan Rodriguez, using marital funds to purchase gifts and fund trips. This includes a pearl necklace valued at $12,000, reported as stolen to insurance, but actually given to Miss Rodriguez. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. He's here. The courtroom doors opened, and Tom Chin from the SEC walked in, followed by 2 federal agents. Andrew's head whipped around, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Your Honor, Tom Chin addressed the judge, I apologize for the interruption. We have a warrant for Andrew Mitchell's arrest on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. Blackwood jumped up. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. So is stealing $3.2 million from client accounts, Judge Coleman responded dryly. She looked at the federal agents. Gentlemen, please wait until we conclude this hearing. Mr. Mitchell isn't going anywhere. Andrew sank into his chair. His phone, sitting on the defendant's table, lit up with call after call. I could see the names flashing, his mother, his business partner James, and repeatedly, Nan. Given the evidence presented, Judge Coleman continued, I'm granting the emergency injunction. All marital assets are frozen pending investigation. Mrs. Mitchell is awarded exclusive use of the marital home and temporary support of $10,000 per month. Mr. Mitchell, you are ordered to stay 500 feet away from your wife. $10,000 a month? Andrew exploded, standing despite Blackwood's attempt to pull him down. That's insane! She doesn't need... Mr. Mitchell, you abandoned your wife in a storm after hiding millions in assets. I'm being generous, not holding you in contempt right now. Sit down. As Andrew collapsed back into his chair, my phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen. I declined the call, but she immediately called again, and again. Rebecca leaned over. You should document those. I nodded, screenshotting the call log. 17 calls from Jennifer in the past hour, 43 from Andrew since last night, 22 from his mother Margaret, even a few from numbers I didn't recognize, probably Andrew's colleagues or clients who'd heard about the federal investigation. Tom Chin approached our table while the judge finalized her orders. Mrs. Mitchell, we'll need your cooperation with our investigation. Your attorney mentioned you have additional evidence. I nodded. 8 months of documentation, financial records, recordings, emails. Good. Your husband's looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted on all charges. Andrew must have heard him because he suddenly stood again, pointing at me. You did this. You set me up. This whole thing was a trap. Judge Coleman's gavel came down hard. Mr. Mitchell, control yourself or I'll add contempt charges. She's been planning this, Andrew continued, his composure completely shattered. The recording, the documentation. She knew I was going to leave her there. So, you admit to abandoning her? The judge asked. Blackwood physically pulled Andrew back down, but the damage was done. Andrew had just confessed in open court in front of federal agents to deliberately abandoning me. As we prepared to leave, Nayan burst through the courtroom doors. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her carefully styled hair disheveled. She looked around wildly until her eyes landed on Andrew. You said you were divorced, she screamed across the courtroom. You said the papers were already filed. You said she was crazy and making things up. The judge sighed. Ma'am, please remove yourself from my courtroom. But Nayan wasn't done. She pulled out her phone, waving it in the air. I have texts, recordings. He promised me we were getting married. He said the money was his. Tom Chin's eyes lit up. He approached Nayan carefully. Ma'am, we'd very much like to speak with you. Andrew's destruction was complete. His mistress was turning state's evidence, his assets were frozen, federal agents were waiting to arrest him, and his carefully constructed image had crumbled in less than an hour. As we walked out, leaving Andrew to be processed by federal agents, my phone buzzed with one final message. It was from Margaret, Andrew's mother. I hope you're satisfied. Destroying a good man over petty jealousy. I deleted it without responding. Margaret would learn soon enough that her son wasn't a good man. He was a criminal who'd been exposed, and I wasn't the one who destroyed him. He destroyed himself. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when we emerged. Someone had leaked the story, probably a court clerk who recognized Andrew's name from the financial pages. Microphones thrust toward us as Rebecca guided me through the crowd, her hand firm on my elbow. "Mrs. Mitchell, is it true your husband stole millions?" "Leslie, how long have you been planning this? Will you be pressing additional charges?" Rebecca stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "My client will not be making any statements at this time. The federal investigation is ongoing." We pushed through to Marcus's truck, and I caught a glimpse of the evening news van setting up across the street. By tonight, Andrew's face would be on every local channel. The golden boy of Minneapolis hedge funds arrested for embezzlement and fraud. Margaret must be dying inside. Back at the hotel, I collapsed onto the couch while Rebecca poured us both water. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since we'd left court. I scrolled through the messages, each one a different flavor of shock or judgment. A text from my hairdresser. "Just saw the news. Good for you, honey." From Andrew's golf buddy, Richard. "This is all a misunderstanding, right? Andrew would never do what they're saying." From 3 different neighbors. Variations of, "We always knew something was off about him." The most interesting message came from James Morrison, Andrew's business partner. "Leslie, we need to talk. There are things about the fund you should know, things that weren't in the federal filing." Rebecca read it over my shoulder. "Set up a meeting. Record everything." At 4 o'clock, the local news broke the story. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Prominent hedge fund manager arrested for embezzlement following spousal abandonment incident." They'd gotten Andrew's mugshot already. He looked haggard, his usual perfectly styled hair disheveled, his designer suit replaced with standard-issue jail clothing. The reporter stood outside our house, my house now, describing the scandal in breathless detail. Sources close to the investigation report that Andrew Mitchell allegedly abandoned his wife during last night's severe storm, leaving her stranded 37 miles from home. This morning, federal agents arrested Mitchell on charges of embezzling $3.2 million from client accounts. His wife, Leslie Mitchell, could not be reached for comment. My phone rang. Jennifer again. This time I answered. "Leslie, please, I need to explain. You told him about Mom's will, about the trust fund Dad set up, about her diagnosis." Silence. Then quietly, "He said he was trying to help. He said you were too stressed to handle the information, that he wanted to protect you. He paid your gambling debts. I didn't know what he was planning. I thought he loved you. He seemed so concerned, so caring. He said you were fragile, that you needed guidance." I thought about all the times Jennifer had called over the past year, asking seemingly innocent questions. "How's Mom doing? Have you talked to her lawyer lately? Remember that property Dad bought in Wisconsin?" Each conversation had been intelligence gathering for Andrew. "He played you," I said, "just like he played me." "Leslie, I'm so sorry. When I saw the news, when I realized what he'd done, I've been sick all day. Can we meet, please?" Rebecca shook her head, but something in Jennifer's voice made me pause. She sounded genuinely broken, not just worried about consequences. "Tomorrow, neutral location, you come alone." After I hung up, Marcus pulled up social media on his laptop. "You need to see this." Andrew's company Facebook page was imploding. Clients were posting demands for their money back. Former employees were sharing stories of suspicious activities they'd witnessed. One woman wrote, "He fired me when I questioned missing funds last year. Now I know why." But the most devastating blow came from Nayen. She'd gone nuclear on Instagram, posting screenshots of their text conversations, photos from their trips funded with stolen money, and a long caption detailing how Andrew had manipulated her into believing I was the villain. "He told me his wife was emotionally disturbed," she wrote, "that she refused to grant him a divorce, that she threatened to ruin him if he left. I believed every word because he was so convincing, so sophisticated. I was an idiot, but he was a master manipulator." The photos were damaging. Andrew and Nayen in first-class seats to Paris, champagne glasses raised. Andrew and Nayen at the exact resort in Mexico where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. Andrew and Nayen in our bed. She'd actually posted that one, though Instagram quickly removed it. By 6 étoiles, Andrew's mother, Margaret, had released a statement through her lawyer. Rebecca read it aloud, barely containing her laughter. "The Mitchell family is shocked by these allegations. We believe this is a coordinated attack, orchestrated by a vindictive spouse seeking financial gain. Andrew Mitchell is an outstanding member of the community who has been victimized by a calculating woman who married him for his money. She's really going with that angle? Marcus asked, after what everyone heard her say in court. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Against Rebecca's advice, I answered. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Patricia Hang from the Wall Street Journal. We're running a story about systematic fraud in boutique hedge funds. Your husband's case is part of a larger pattern we've been investigating. Would you be willing to share your experience? Rebecca took the phone. This is Leslie Mitchell's attorney. All press inquiries should be directed to my office. She hung up and turned to me. By tomorrow, this will be national news. Andrew didn't just destroy himself. He's taking down an entire network of corrupt fund managers. The FBI is expanding their investigation. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in Federal Holding, Andrew was probably meeting with Blackwood, trying to figure out how to spin this. But there was no spinning video evidence, recorded confessions, and millions in stolen money. My phone lit up with one more message, this one from David Brennan, Andrew's biggest client. Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that several of us victims are pursuing civil suits against your husband. However, we want to be clear, you are not our target. We know you are a victim too. In fact, we'd like you to testify about what you observed. The irony was perfect. Andrew had spent years telling me I was too stupid to understand finance, too naive to grasp business. Now, his former clients wanted my testimony to help bury him. As the sun set over Minneapolis, painting the sky the color of justice, I realized that Andrew's public downfall was just beginning. Tomorrow there would be more headlines, more revelations, more people coming forward with stories about the man they trusted with their money. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I sat in peaceful silence, no longer afraid of his footsteps, his moods, his cruel words designed to keep me small. The man who'd abandoned me in the rain had created his own storm, and now he was drowning in it. The next morning brought a knock at my hotel door that I wasn't expecting. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer standing in the hallway, her usually perfect appearance completely undone. Her hands shook as she clutched a manila envelope to her chest, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. I thought we agreed to meet at a neutral location. I couldn't wait. Leslie, please. There are things you need to know right now, before the FBI talks to me this afternoon. Marcus appeared in the doorway of the adjoining room, alert and protective. I nodded to him that it was okay, then let Jennifer inside. She sat on the edge of the couch, placing the envelope on the coffee table with trembling fingers. Andrew first contacted me 13 months ago, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He knew about the gambling. I don't know how he found out, but he knew I owed $47,000 to some very unforgiving people. He offered to pay it all, no questions asked, if I just answered some questions about our family finances. And you agreed. My voice was flat, controlled. I was desperate. They were threatening to go to my employer, to ruin my career. Andrew seemed like he genuinely wanted to help. He said you were too proud to ask our parents for money, that he wanted to surprise you by solving family problems behind the scenes. She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of printed emails. These are our conversations, every one of them. I printed them all last night when I realized what he'd really been doing. I picked up the first email, dated over a year ago. Andrew's tone was warm, concerned, brotherly even. He wrote about wanting to be a better husband, wanting to understand my family dynamic so he could support me better. The manipulation was masterful. He was particularly interested in Mom, Jennifer continued. He wanted to know about her health, her mental state, her finances. I thought he was planning something nice for her, maybe paying for better care. You told him about the Alzheimer's. Jennifer nodded, tears streaming down her face. She made me promise not to tell you. She didn't want you to worry, said you had enough stress with Andrew being so demanding. But he was so persistent, so caring. He said he'd noticed signs and wanted to help. I kept reading. The emails showed Andrew's questions growing more specific over time. What properties did our parents own? Were there any trusts? Who was the executor of their wills? Jennifer had answered everything, believing she was helping her brother-in-law better care for our family. Last month, he asked me to get Mom to sign some papers, Jennifer said. He said they were for insurance purposes, that it would protect her assets if her condition worsened. I actually took them to her, Leslie. Thank God her lawyer was there that day and recognized them as property transfer documents. That's when I started to realize something was wrong. My phone buzzed. David Brennan was calling. I put him on speaker so Marcus could hear. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry to bother you, but this is urgent. I've been going through our client files all night. Andrew wasn't just stealing from the general fund. He specifically targeted our elderly clients, particularly widows. What do you mean targeted? Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, for instance. Her husband died 2 years ago, left her everything with specific instructions that Andrew personally manage her portfolio. Within 6 months, Andrew had convinced her to sign power of attorney documents. She thought she was giving him authority to make trades. He used it to drain her accounts. I felt sick. Eleanor Hartley was 78 years old. I had met her at several company events. A sweet woman who always talked about her grandchildren. How much did he take from her? $800,000. But here's the worst part. He convinced her she was developing memory problems, that she was forgetting conversations about withdrawals she'd authorized. He gaslit an elderly woman into believing she had dementia. Marcus was already taking notes, documenting everything for Rebecca. This changed the entire scope of the case. Andrew wasn't just a white-collar criminal. He was a predator who specifically hunted vulnerable people. I have recordings, David continued. I started secretly recording our partnership meetings 2 years ago when I noticed discrepancies. I was building a case to take to the authorities, but I was scared. Andrew had connections everywhere. But now that he's already in custody, I want to provide everything I have. After David hung up, Jennifer pulled out one more document from her envelope. There's something else about Dad's estate. Our father had died 5 years ago, leaving what we thought was a modest inheritance split between Jennifer and me. But the paper she handed me showed something different. A trust account in my name alone, established the year before he died. He knew about my gambling even then, Jennifer said quietly. He loved me, but he didn't trust me with money. So he set this up for you, with Mom as the trustee. It's worth about $2 million. Andrew found out about it through me, and he's been trying to access it for months. I stared at the document. $2 million my father had hidden to protect it from both Jennifer's addiction and, unknowingly, from my husband's greed. The account was held at a small private bank in Wisconsin, one Andrew wouldn't have known about without Jennifer's information. We need to go see Mom, Jennifer said, today. She's been holding on to something for you, something she wouldn't even tell me about. She said she was waiting for the right moment. An hour later, we sat in my mother's room at the memory care facility. She was having one of her increasingly rare clear days, her eyes bright and focused as she held my hand. I knew what he was the first time I met him, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. The way he looked at our house, evaluating everything like he was cataloging assets. The way he steered conversations toward money. Your father saw it too. She reached into her bedside drawer and pulled out a small key. Safety deposit box. First National Bank on Hennepin. Your father put things there the week before he died. Documents. Evidence. Evidence of what, Mom? Andrew tried to forge your signature last year. Loan documents. Property transfers. The bank manager was your father's friend. He called me, sent me copies of everything. It's all in the box. I took the key, feeling its weight. My father had been protecting me even from beyond the grave. And my mother had been standing guard over that protection despite her declining memory. There's more, Mom said, her grip tightening on my hand. The FBI came here yesterday. Not about Andrew's arrest, about something bigger. They said his name came up in an investigation that's been running for 3 years. A network of fund managers who've been systematically defrauding elderly clients across 5 states. The room felt suddenly airless. Andrew's abandonment of me in the rain wasn't just about control or cruelty. He'd known the FBI was closing in. He'd wanted me broken and compliant because he thought he could use me as either a shield or a scapegoat when everything collapsed. He never expected you to fight back, my mother said, a small smile crossing her face. Men like him never do. They think kindness is weakness. They're always surprised when they learn otherwise. As we prepared to leave, my mother squeezed my hand one more time. Your father would be proud of you. You're stronger than Andrew ever imagined. Driving away from the facility, Jennifer beside me and Marcus following in his truck, I thought about the layers of deception Andrew had built. Each revelation peeled back another level of his criminality. He wasn't just a bad husband or a corrupt fund manager. He was the center of a web of financial abuse that had destroyed dozens of lives. But he'd made one fatal error. He'd assumed that the woman he'd left in the rain would stay there, broken and defeated. Instead, she'd become the storm that would wash away everything he'd built on the suffering of others. The First National Bank on Hennepin stood like a fortress of old money and older secrets. Jennifer waited in the car while Marcus accompanied me inside, where the safety deposit box my mother had protected waited in a climate-controlled vault. The bank manager, Mr. Paulson, remembered my father well and handled the key with the reverence of someone who understood he was part of something significant. Inside the box lay a stack of documents that made my hands tremble. Forged loan applications with my signature, dated 6 months ago, property transfer papers for my grandmother's lake house, which Andrew had apparently tried to sell without my knowledge, bank statements from accounts I'd never seen, opened in my name but controlled by Andrew. My father had somehow obtained copies of everything, his handwriting on sticky notes explaining what each document meant. One note attached to a forged power of attorney document simply read, "He will try to take everything. Don't let him." Marcus photographed every page while I sat in stunned silence. The scope of Andrew's betrayal kept expanding like ink spreading through water. This wasn't just about our marriage or even the stolen millions. He'd been systematically working to erase my financial existence, to make me completely dependent on him, or worse, to frame me for his crimes if necessary. 4 months later, I walked into the federal courthouse for the first day of Andrew's criminal trial. The media attention had only intensified since his arrest. News vans lined the street. Reporters called out questions I didn't answer. I wore a charcoal gray suit that had never seen the inside of our shared closet, bought specifically for this moment, professional, dignified, expensive enough to show I wasn't broken. Andrew sat at the defendant's table in a suit that no longer fit properly. He'd lost weight in federal custody, and his formerly perfect hair had grown out awkwardly. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I smiled. The same serene smile I used to give him over morning coffee when he'd lecture me about my spending. But now that smile carried the weight of everything I knew and everything he was about to lose. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres, laid out the case methodically. 12 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of elder abuse, 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Doctored books, hidden accounts, forged documents, recorded conversations where Andrew explicitly discussed stealing from clients. For 11 days, witness after witness took the stand. Elderly clients described how Andrew had convinced them to sign documents they didn't understand. Former employees testified about being ordered to falsify records. The forensic accountant walked the jury through the labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies Andrew had created. On day 12, the courtroom doors opened and Nayan Rodriguez walked in. She looked nothing like the polished young woman who'd worn my grandmother's pearls. Her designer clothes had been replaced with a conservative dress, her elaborate hairstyle with a simple bun. She'd been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she was about to bury Andrew with it. "Ms. Rodriguez," the prosecutor began, "how long were you romantically involved with the defendant?" 18 months, Nayan answered, her voice steady but quiet. "And during that time, did Mr. Mitchell ever discuss his business practices with you?" "Yes, frequently. He thought it was amusing to explain how he was moving money around without anyone noticing. He called it playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else played checkers." She produced recordings from her phone, conversations where Andrew bragged about targeting elderly clients, about hiding money from me, about his plans to disappear to Costa Rica once he'd accumulated enough. In one recording, his voice clear and damning, he said, "Leslie's the perfect cover. Sweet, trusting, asks no questions. By the time she figures out what's happening, I'll be gone and she'll be left holding the bag." But Nayan's most devastating revelation came near the end of her testimony. 3 weeks before his arrest, Andrew told me he was planning to leave me too. He had another woman in Costa Rica, someone he'd met online. He was going to abandon me, just like he abandoned his wife. The look on Andrew's face was worth every moment of pain he'd caused me. His jaw dropped. His attorney frantically whispered in his ear, but the damage was done. His mistress had just revealed that he'd been playing everyone, including her. The next day brought another shock. A young man named Christopher Walsh took the stand, 22 years old, with Andrew's same sharp jawline and calculating eyes. The prosecutor established his identity quickly. Andrew's son from a college relationship, whose existence Andrew had hidden for over 2 decades. My mother has been receiving payments from Andrew Mitchell for 22 years, Christopher testified, $1,500 a month to keep quiet about my existence. She has records showing the money came from his client accounts. I watched Andrew shrink in his chair as Christopher continued. He told my mother that if she ever contacted his family or went public, he'd destroy her reputation and ensure she never worked in finance again. She has that threat in writing. The prosecutor introduced 22 years of bank records showing regular payments from the same accounts Andrew had been pillaging. He'd been stealing from elderly clients not just for luxury and escape, but to hide the evidence of his past. Andrew's defense attorney tried to object, arguing this was prejudicial and irrelevant to the financial crimes, but Judge Coleman overruled him. It establishes a pattern of deception and financial malfeasance spanning the defendant's entire adult life. On the final day of testimony, Andrew made the catastrophic decision to take the stand himself. Against his attorney's visible protests, he stood and walked to the witness box, still believing he could talk his way out of this. For 2 hours, he tried to spin a narrative where he was the victim. He claimed I'd known about the affairs and approved. He insisted the elderly clients had authorized every transaction. He portrayed himself as a brilliant financial mind who'd simply made some bookkeeping errors. Then the prosecutor began his cross-examination, and Andrew's composure cracked like ice under pressure. When confronted with the recordings, he claimed they were taken out of context. When shown the forged documents, he suggested I might have created them. When presented with evidence of the hush money to Christopher's mother, he actually said that was a personal matter unrelated to my business. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. As the foreman stood to read the verdict, I held Marcus's hand on one side and Rebecca's on the other. On count 1, wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. By the time they reached count 15, Andrew had put his head in his hands, guilty on all charges. The man who'd left me in the rain 37 miles from home was about to learn what real abandonment felt like. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. Judge Coleman, the same woman who'd overseen our emergency hearing months ago, looked down at Andrew with undisguised contempt. Mr. Mitchell, you targeted the most vulnerable members of society. You betrayed the trust of clients, colleagues, and family. You showed no remorse, accepting no responsibility, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of your crimes. This court sentences you to 96 months in federal prison without the possibility of early release. 8 years. Andrew would spend 8 years behind bars. As the bailiffs prepared to lead him away, he turned to me one last time. "This isn't over," he mouthed. I stood and spoke clearly, knowing the courtroom microphones would capture every word. "You're right. The civil suits start next month." The bailiffs led Andrew away in shackles, and I walked out of the courthouse into a September afternoon that felt like the first day of spring. The civil suits would indeed start next month, with 17 of Andrew's victims seeking restitution. But that was Rebecca's battlefield. Now I had something more important to build. The whistleblower reward came through 6 weeks after Andrew's sentencing, $1.2 million, for providing information that led to the recovery of stolen funds. Combined with the assets the court awarded me and the trust fund my father had protected, I suddenly had the resources to do something meaningful with the pain Andrew had caused. Marcus found the building first, a renovated Victorian in Minneapolis's Whittier neighborhood that had previously housed a law firm. 3 stories, 8 offices, a conference room large enough for group sessions, and most importantly, multiple exits, something women escaping dangerous situations would need. We signed the lease on a Thursday. By Monday, the Phoenix Foundation had its home. "We need proper security systems," Marcus said, walking through the empty rooms with his tablet, making notes. "Panic buttons in every office, secured entry, surveillance that actually protects people instead of monitoring them." Valentina arrived with boxes of filing systems and encryption software. I've already had 3 forensic accountants reach out wanting to volunteer their services, word spreading in the financial community about what we're doing. Rebecca had taken a leave of absence from her practice to help establish our legal aid program. "We need to be careful about how we structure this," she said, spreading incorporation documents across the conference table. "We're going to be dealing with dangerous situations, angry spouses, potential legal retaliation. Everything has to be bulletproof." Within a month, we had our first client. Maria, a teacher whose husband had hidden their savings and threatened to report her to immigration services if she tried to leave, even though she was a citizen. Valentina found the money. Rebecca filed the papers. Marcus arranged safe transportation. I sat with Maria while she cried, remembering my own tears in that hotel room the night Andrew abandoned me. Jennifer arrived at the foundation on a rainy Tuesday, 3 months sober and carrying a box of donuts as a peace offering. "I want to help," she said simply. "I know what it's like to be manipulated, to be so desperate you betray people you love. Maybe I can help others see the signs before it's too late." We started her as a volunteer, answering phones and filing paperwork. But Jennifer had a gift for talking to women who called in crisis. She understood desperation and shame in ways that even trained counselors sometimes missed. Within 6 months, she was running our support groups, sharing her story of how Andrew had exploited her addiction to gather information, helping others recognize when they were being used. My mother came to visit on one of her clear days, Marcus driving her carefully through the city she'd once known so well. She sat in my office, looking at the framed photos on the walls, women who'd given permission to share their success stories, faces beaming as they stood in front of new apartments at graduation ceremonies, with children they'd managed to keep safe. "Your father would be so proud," she said, touching a photo of a woman who'd escaped with 3 children and was now in nursing school. "He always said the best revenge against cruelty was kindness to others." She pulled out an envelope from her purse. "This came to the house. I thought you should see it." Inside was a newspaper clipping from the prison newsletter. Andrew had been elected treasurer of the Inmates Investment Club. Even behind bars, he was trying to maintain his image as a financial genius. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The surprise volunteer came 7 months after the trial. Nayan Rodriguez stood in our reception area looking nothing like the woman who'd worn my grandmother's pearls. She'd cut her hair short, traded designer clothes for simple slacks and a button-down shirt, and carried herself with a humility I'd never seen before. "I've been in therapy," she said, sitting across from me in my office, working through how I got involved with someone like Andrew, why I ignored the red flags, why I participated in hurting you. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can prevent other young women from making my mistakes. She started by speaking at colleges, warning business students about older men in power who promise career advancement in exchange for companionship. She was brutally honest about her own choices, taking responsibility while also explaining the gradual manipulation that made those choices seem reasonable at the time. "He made me feel special," she told a group of graduate students one evening. "Like I was smarter and more sophisticated than other women my age. By the time I realized I was just another victim in his game, I was in too deep to see the exit." 1 year after Andrew's sentencing, a letter arrived at the foundation. His handwriting was still perfect, even on prison stationery. 4 pages of vitriol, blaming me for his downfall, claiming I'd orchestrated everything from the beginning, that I'd entrapped him. He listed every perceived slight, every moment he now realized had been part of my plan. The final line read, "I hope you learned your lesson." I had the letter professionally framed and hung it on my office wall, right next to my degrees and certifications. When clients asked about it, I told them the truth. Yes, I had learned my lesson. I'd learned that when someone shows you who they are through their cruelty, believe them. I'd learned that patience and planning could overcome years of abuse. Most importantly, I'd learned that the best response to someone trying to break you is to become unbreakable, then use that strength to lift others. 18 months after that night at the rest stop, I stood in my office looking at a wall covered in thank you cards. 87 women had found safety through the Phoenix Foundation. Some had needed just legal advice and financial forensics. Others had required complete extraction plans, safe houses, and new identities. Each one had arrived broken in some way, convinced they were trapped, that their situation was hopeless. Eleanor Hartley, the widow Andrew had defrauded, had become our biggest donor. She'd recovered most of her money through the civil suits and insisted on funding our emergency shelter program. "That man tried to convince me I was losing my mind," she said at our fundraising gala. "Leslie showed me I was actually finding my strength." The rain was falling again outside, drumming against the windows of the Victorian that housed hopes and second chances. I thought about that night, 37 miles from home, standing in the downpour while Andrew drove away, confident he'd broken me. He thought he was teaching me about power and control, about knowing my place. Instead, he taught me that cruelty creates its own destruction, that every action has consequences, and that sometimes the person you abandon in the rain has already seen the storm coming and prepared accordingly. Through the Phoenix Foundation, his act of calculated cruelty had become the catalyst for saving women he never believed deserved saving. The ultimate lesson, the one Andrew never saw coming, wasn't about obedience or respect or knowing one's place. It was about transformation. He tried to leave me powerless in a storm. Instead, I'd become the shelter. If this story of calculated justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Leslie stood in court, wearing the sharp suit Andrew always said made women look too aggressive, and smiled at him with the same serene expression she used to give him over breakfast. What was your favorite moment of sweet revenge? Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.